Hey guys, this week we're going to get into model-based retouching, or just basic model-based retouching, and we're going to jump right into this. I never want to make adjustments to my original image. I always want to be able to work in a non-destructive way. So a lot of the techniques that we look at today are going to be applied to different layers. Just to kind of give you an overview of what we're going to be doing with this image. I did not take this image. I pulled this image off of Model Mayhem, I think. And what we're going to be doing is just making a couple of different adjustments. I'm going to be working through this kind of quickly. You can take your time and really just kind of dig into your edit and whatnot. This is by no means the way that you have to edit every image, but this will give you a good starting point of what you can and what you should do from image to image. So a couple things that we're going to do. We're going to remove some blemishes in a non-destructive way, add some depth, some highlight and some shadow depth in local areas. We're going to even out some skin tones and remove some splotchiness. We're going to remove some flyaway hairs and different stuff like that. We'll even get into some spot sharpening and softening, changing the eye color, adding definition to the eyes and different stuff like that, and even reshaping a couple of different areas. Where I usually like to start for any retouch is I try to keep everything organized. So I'm just going to create a new group, blemishes, and what I'm going to do is on this blemishes group, I'm going to create a brand new layer. And in this new layer, I'm going to go in and I'm going to use some of my tools in order to remove some of these blemishes. For this particular one, I could use the clone stamp tool. In order to use the clone stamp tool, you have to go to your clone stamp, choose where you want to sample from. And if I'm doing this in a non-destructive way, I'm going to be sampling from the background layer, but I'm actually going to be cloning to this layer 1. So I want to make sure that sample is set not to current layer, but to current and below, or I could even choose all layers. And then I can go in, I can set up my opacity, set up my flow, however I want that to work. But the clone stamp, you have to hold down your option to set a point, and you click once to set that point. That's the area that you're going to clone from, and then we can use that to clone to another area. So sample an area that doesn't have a blemish and paint into an area that does. The only thing with using the clone stamp tool is you have to sample from an area that has the same tonal values. So if I sample from an area like this and then paint it on an area like this, you can see that that doesn't match up. So I'm going to undo that. The healing brush kind of works the same way as the clone stamp tool, except Photoshop will actually try to heal the area that you sample to. So again, you hold down option, you click in an area to set a source point, and then you paint in an area that you want to replace. The only thing is you don't have to be quite as precise of the areas that you sample from, because Photoshop will do a pretty good job of matching those pixels up. So with the clone stamp tool and with the healing brush, you have to sample in order to set a source point. With spot healing brush, you don't have to do that. The spot healing brush uses something called content aware, which will take an area that's outside of the selection that you create and try to match the pixels within that section. So all you have to really do is go basically draw over an area that has a blemish, and Photoshop will do its best in order to heal that. Now, just like with the clone stamp, you have to make sure that you are sampling from all of your layers. So I'm painting, or I'm placing those blemish removals here on layer 1, but I have to sample from my background because there are no pixels on this layer. So I'm going to click sample all layers, and I'm just going to go find these areas. I'm going to hold down my space bar, just kind of move around this, and I'm going to use this in order to heal these areas. Now, an area that you want to really pay attention to, if you get into an area that's got a lot of contrast and you try to sample it, sometimes you'll get a blur and it'll look pretty nasty. So when you get into an area like that, you may need to use your clone stamp tool. I also would do flyaway hairs. This Photoshop witchery. Love it. And I'll just go ahead and kind of click through this quickly, just so we can go on to the next section. Now the next thing we're going to look at is how we can even out some of this skin tone. And again, I'm just going to work real quickly, and you can take more time and you can kind of dive into this as you want to. Select the eyedropper tool. Shortcut key is the I key. And I'm just going to sample a skin tone. Now when I do that, it's going to make that my foreground color over here. When I go to fill or create new fill layer, layers, create new or new fill layer, and choose solid color, it's going to fill that with the actual color of this layer. And the cool thing about it being a solid color layer is if I don't like this color, I can always change it by just changing this color right here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer to color. I'm going to take my layer mask that comes with this, and I'm going to invert it, Command I, and then using my brush tool, I can turn my flow up a little bit, but using my brush tool and painting white, I'm going to paint in where I want to even out these skin tones. Now some areas I want to stay away from. Stay away from the eyes. You don't want that. And you can kind of paint around these areas. You can control your brush size. You can control how much you lay this down just by controlling your brush size. You can even go in and turn your opacity of this layer up or down, and you'll kind of see the effects of this. And if you don't like that color at all, you can just double click and you can go in and you can move that color around. That looks legit. And then you can use this as a base, and then you can build on top of this. Alright, so I'm gonna fast forward through this and come back in just a second, and we'll move on to the next section.